the medical thing, we have to be very careful with the register. This is as a comment here. There is Gurji Ishaq Rabi', there is Gurji Salman Rabi', but there is no Gurji Harun Rabi'. So unless you've seen Gurji Harun Rabi', he's not the same Gurji, which meant basically did not register. Okay. Regarding the cinema, if you need any information, the Saudai was my classmate. So all the information about the Saudais. And we had a lodge every Friday. And we basically in Cinema Al-Khayyam. And my father had to call to release it so it's part of that culture that you're talking about. Okay.
Yes, over there. And then I see Sami's hand. So maybe Sami will go.
So thank you so much for your presentation, and especially the cinema one. You presented the first cinema as Zawra, which is basically, unfortunately, now it's converted to storage recently. So
Hacking.
yeah, and regarding the paper, about medicine, I wonder also, there is some of my colleagues and my friends, Iraqi Jew, 2 doctors who still they are living in Baghdad. They refuse to leave. So I wonder how they, entered and graduated from medicine college. As we heard from Khidr and others, it was prohibited, during the Ba'ath party. The other things about history, 10 years I am here as SOAS and studied many disciplines, and my mother language is Arabic. So all my reading about history was in Arabic. And when I came and trying to understand Iraq from Western perspective, it's completely different narratives. The lack of the translation of the main source, pre-Islamic sources, and also the modern, we have a lot of Iraqi theorists and thinkers, which is, unfortunately, they are not translated in Arabic. This is why we saw a different narrative, which is, for example, I witness the era of many wars and embargo, which is when I read here, I found different history. So coming back to the first presentation, when he mentioned about the archive, the part period when the fall of Baghdad during the invasion of Mongol, and he said we don't want or we cannot want to go to the archive of Safawi or the archive of the Ottoman. But at that period, there is a very important book, Tarikh al-Ayadi, the Ayadi history, which is really covered that period, which is not translated to English. This is why.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a long line.
I know,
so
but
if
we
there's
see
specific questions about cinema or medicine. Sorry. No, but ask your question, but just if you have any specific question to any speaker.
I would like that the British Institute really to start to translate the main sources from Arabic to English. And this will give opportunity for a Western researcher or also the other researcher who does not know Arabic in order to have another perspective from I don't want to identify Muslim historian or Iraqi historian or sociologist. And this is really my
thank you.
My wish.
Okay, so let's continue and collect a few. So yeah, Sami? No, Sami here. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you all for fascinating presentations. In particular, on the question of medicine, there's one aspect which I'm sure you must have also gone into, which is the way in which doctors who went at some point to the medical college were under contract to work for the government and be posted to different parts of the country. And this led to several Jewish doctors who were posted in the provinces, sometimes the remote provinces, and led to really interesting interactions with local populations and perceptions of. I interviewed one of them who, this was Yahud Gabbai, who became quite famous because he was posted in various parts of the south and the west and so on, often very sort of primitive facilities, and he performed surgeries on kitchen tables and was quite famous for being quite, and he became quite a legend. And it was very interesting to talk about the way in which he interacted with the local power structure, you know, the sheikhs and the mutasarrif and the district authorities and so on. So I'm sure that you must have covered some of this, but you know, it'd be interesting to see what.
I definitely read your microhistory on Dr. Naji in Edinburgh, yeah, and it was one of the foundational pieces for my dissertation, which looked at the process of medical education in Iraq. And absolutely, the contract between the government and the medical student was a way to address the medical shortage crisis in Iraq and to ensure that the doctors were dispersed across the country equally. However, because a significant portion of the medical students, at least initially, were middle or upper class urbanites, it was very difficult to convince them to not mobilize their wasta and stay in the post that they were assigned. Most likely they would mobilize wasta and be stationed in an urban center. But what we do find is doctors who don't have these networks are the ones that get to go in the provinces, in districts, non-urban centers, if you will, and they're working in underserviced clinics. They're performing duties and procedures that are not necessarily their specialty, and they're integrating within the local community. So I think that goes back to this urban periphery paradigm that we're always referring to in Iraqi studies. But also, it's really interesting because the patient-doctor interactions, that deserves its own study, and I'm trying to sort of go that angle in my future projects, because at the end of the day, be it Jewish or not, when you're a patient going to a doctor, you're not selecting the ethno-religious background of your doctor. You're going to a doctor because you know your community trusts Dr. Naji or trusts Dr. Rabia. So there isn't, from a patient's perspective, I've yet to find evidence to suggest that there was any sectarian or ethno-religious compass that dictated which doctor the patient sought after. But yeah, that's very interesting, and I want to do more work on the peripheral region. Thank you.
So we have Dia, Emil. So we're just collecting. Please keep it short. About cinema, doctors, RMA. Thank you.
Thank you. About Dr. Jack Aboud, his name actually become part of our culture, and maybe in the time I born in Baghdad. If you want to say about someone he's talking nonsense, you just say that he visited Jack Aboud as example.
Yeah.
And because his clinic, by the way, his clinic was in the first floor. So if you want to say about someone he's mad, he's went on the steps, or he climbed the steps, which means صعد الدرج. It means he went to visit Dr. Jack Aboud. It's known because he has a clinic in the first floor. With regard the first presentation about the Jewish lady who used to breastfeed a Muslim child, my mom told me that as like it's a taboo later on in my life, that she used to do the same with Jewish neighbors' babies, because she used to have extra milk She used to eat a lot of dates, and that dates gave her the on the I recall that cheap bars in Baghdad, they actually screw the plate to the table. So when the people get drunk, they don't use it as a weapon.
They use the table.
Even the table used to be screwed to the floor. And mainly, of course, the bars were, because the law allow non-Muslim to have the, allowed to be the owner of any alcoholic place. So mainly Christian owners and serving the customers. Of course, mainly the Muslim are the customers. For the cinema, Abu al-Arba'in, I used to use the Abu al-Arba'in, not just because it's cheap, it's cooler because of the air condition in hot weather in Baghdad. The best place to go in the Abu al-Arba'in, I remember Cinema Sindbad in Sa'doun Street. And about the Kallachia.
This is the
It's the official, first time when I visited Tehran, Iran, the capital of Iran, I was surprised that actually there is in Iraq, they closed it at the time when I visited Tehran in 1968. It was a city, inside the city, with a policeman sitting outside, and they told me, young people I know there, that they told me that actually there is a medical department inside. And I said, don't forget, I was 15 years old. So I said, doctors doing the job for this part, He said, oh, don't worry, they are all either Christian or Jewish.
Yeah.
So the doctor who actually
known, yeah.
work in this Kallachia normally. And I'm sorry to say, what I remember of in my time in the 60s when I become an adult, that in the medicine, the nurses, because their job include that they work sometime overnight, and that gives them a bad reputation. So they are, sometimes they she is a nurse. It means she's like, I'm very sorry to say, like a whore. And that's in the 60s. Although after that, people started, girls started going to university to become a nurse. But before that, they were, had a very bad reputation. Thank you.
Okay, so we saw Emil and then Lital and then Ella. So
Mine is a quick question to Sara, actually. I know that there was one time, there was a lot of Jews entering into medical colleges because of their high education. And the outcome was that there were a high percentage of, you mentioned that, a high percentage of Jews coming out, graduating. But I believe that at one time, the government introduced a quota of Jews entering, so that the product will be, balancing, rather than having this disproportionate number of Jews coming up. Can you confirm that, please, and when that quota was introduced?
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
so just we're collecting. So Ella? Yeah. I'm sorry for it's just that you don't see the sea of hands from here. So.
Sure, thank you. No, just a wonderful, wonderful panel. Thank you. I just wanted to, with regards to the doctors, I'd be happy just to give you more information and put you in touch with Dr. Gurji Rabi. His daughter is actually one of my best friends. So, and they actually collected photos, and they have even his graduation. So, I'll be happy to do that. But also, just in Great Neck in New York, many of those doctors moved there, and they're buried in the cemetery over there, some of them. And with regards to the important role of women, Renee, whom you mentioned, Ishaq, actually she ended up marrying a German Jewish doctor, Kropach,
Oh, yes.
and sent her sister to study at AUB, and she became an important doctor. I mean, she was treated us and was basically a family member. Dr. Samha Ishaq, and she practiced gynecology in Ramat Ishaq, next to Ramat Gan. So I'd be happy to give you more information about her, because she didn't marry and he didn't have children. She was my role model, by the way.
Thank you. There's a question there, and there, and then we have to answer. I'm sorry.
Just a question for Professor Khan regarding your work has, of course, been on the oral aspects of the Aramaic-speaking Jews of northern Iraq, Kurdistan, but I'd just be interested to know in the written sources that you have, whether there's any Gershuni, whether you have Gershuni sources, i.e. writing other languages in Hebrew script or vice versa, using other scripts to write Hebrew or Aramaic.
Okay, so the two last questions at the back were Lital and over there. Yeah.
Thank you for these amazing, really, really interesting papers. I also had a few references that came to mind. One is on the, I can't remember if he's talking about the Hashemite period, but Orit might know. Yaakov Bilbul's novel, Kul Shei Hadi Fil Ayeda, I thought might be relevant. Did you read that? Okay.
Shalom Darwish.
It's Darwish. Sorry. Darwish. I'm sorry. Still jet lagged. Then I was thinking also, Eli Amir's novel, Mafriach Hayonim, The Dove Flyer, has representation of the Kalachia in Baghdad. And then the film version, which is very interesting, also represents it, with the policeman sitting outside. So if you're interested, Pelle, in popular culture, it could be, worthwhile looking at the film. I was also thinking about in Victoria, Sami Michael's novel, they always refer to this teatro, with like a wow at the end, or a vav in Hebrew. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be the cabaret or what it is, but that's what it's called, is where the, okay. Yeah, so that's represented in that novel. And then one last thing also is Ottoman Jewish doctors. I know it's earlier than the Hashemite period, but there was such a phenomenon. I know at least of one. So yes, in Iraq and outside of it. So you probably already have, but one reference, if you're interested, to an Ottoman, a Jewish doctor who served in the Ottoman army during the war is Shimon Mayal. He actually was killed in the war serving in that capacity.
Thank you. And the last question is over there, and then we'll let you guys answer. Whatever. The two last
Two quick questions. One, firstly, to Geoffrey Khan. You mentioned the members of the Jewish community in the Nina region who did not leave in 1952 to 1972. And could you just address their innovations in language? How did they adapt if they converted, or if they remained practicing Jews but didn't publicly proclaim their faith? Have you done research on how their language changed as a result of that attempt to portray themselves as non-Jewish in that period from the 70s through to the present? In respect of the presentation on medical professionals, you use the language of, well, it would be good to just focus a bit more, if you could, on the effects of the new medical profession in Iraq in the 1940s and 50s. You use the language of nation building, nation state formation, and it would be, obviously there is an effect in terms of medical help to the people, to their patients, but what were you trying to get across with that language of nation formation in the presentation?
Yeah, the lady sitting next to Professor Fattah, and then we're done. Yeah, here. It was waiting very patiently.
Hello, my name is Makaram Ibrahim. I just want to thank you. It's very important information you give us. My question, just I want, can we get your information for paper so we can have it saved? Because I think it's very important information we get here from. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You guys, yeah, want to start?
Oh, okay. Regarding the Ba'athist systemic exclusion of Jewish doctors, I didn't focus extensively on that, but what I can tell you is immediately after they took over power in '68, they began a forced exile, forced retirement plans of already established professors that were formed during the period I discussed. And they were targeting a specific sector of medical professionals that were established during the Hashemite period. The period that I cover, I've looked through the the medical laws as well as medical education laws extensively. I've not come across a single piece of law that deliberately states the exclusion of Jewish doctors or Jewish medical student applicants. So that goes to Emil's question. You're right, I do think there was a quota. I think it was a tacit quota. It wasn't publicly acknowledged. And there is a public understanding that there's a quota. The students were well aware of it. The professional classes or aspiring doctors understood that. But many students knew how to manipulate it. So students who had a great-grandfather that is from Mosul, and they know that the Baghdad quote has been fulfilled, and they don't have the high average to bypass the Baghdad quota, they would use their great-grandfather's record to say, well, actually, I'm Maslawi, to bypass that. And I think I have two sources regarding Jewish doctors who did do just that. They're Baghdadis, but they referred back to this weird part. But the Mandaean community also felt that there was a quota of one Mandaean student per year. They also felt that. So yes, but it wasn't an official state policy, definitely a tacit, something you don't talk about in public, nothing written down. Should I keep?
No. Coffee. Now I have to be strict. Yeah, continue.
Oh, okay.
So I'm really sorry, but
Okay. The next one is, Dr. Jack Aboudi is part of the lexicon. There is a saying, and I don't know how popular it is, but like, Ya Audi, al-qatli aw Aboudi. It's basically like to discipline young children, either I'm gonna beat you or send you to the crazy house. But to compare it to, for example, American University of Beirut, they have their own lexicon regarding the العصفوري راح تبعتيني للعصفوري. So the same thing, but we refer it to our pioneering doctor in terms of neurology and psychiatry. But it's really important to highlight that he was a multi-specialist because he was doing a plethora of research that was targeting various areas. So absolutely, thank you for pointing that out. Should I address it? Very quickly? Okay. Regarding the Kalachia, so that word is not ours. It's not from Iraq. It came from the Mongolian migration, actually, and it's أضربك على الكلعة. So هاي الكلعة. So the area where they would kind of pile the heads of the supposed Mongol invasion victims was also the area where it became like the affordable food area where you would go to get to the pachachi. So when people say, I'm gonna go to the Kalachia, it's to get affordable services, which eventually became part of the lexicon as that. As for nurses, yes, I get the derogatory aspect of the profession, and it exists, but not amongst the professional classes. I think after a certain, I would say 1930, latter part of 1930s, it was becoming an acceptable profession for middle-class families. But yes, initially the British did complain that a lot of individuals or families didn't want to send their daughters out of fear of their reputation. I think everything else that was stated was, nation formation, sorry. My argument, the way I look at the Hashemite monarchy as an entity it was an ongoing project, an ongoing experiment that really depended on various communities, professionals, non-professionals, to kind of negotiate a back and forth process to establish this thing called Iraq. And it was a constant, it was changing all the time. Whatever Iraq meant was changing to all of the players within this game. So that's how I approach it, is on the one hand, the early nation building project was highly dependent on Jewish professionals. And this is not just medical professionals, but I do argue that medical professionals were the most important. So this is kind of how I approach it. I hope that satisfies your, thank you.
I don't think there are any questions.
Regard to Erica's question, yes, I mean, the vast majority of these dialects I was talking about are spoken, oral languages with no written tradition. There was some oral traditions of literature, particularly recitations of oral translations of the Bible and some religious homilies. And some of these were written down from the 17th century onwards. We have one or two manuscripts of those. A lot of these, well, some of the oral traditions of Bible translations were also written down when the Jews came to Israel in the 1950s, 60s. But the vast majority of the dialects, 50 or 60 Jewish dialects, have no written records. Regarding Glenn's question about the language of the Jews who remained in Iraq, this phenomenon of hiding their religion publicly and their being publicly registered as Muslims and Christians meant that it accelerated the loss of their Aramaic language. And certainly there were some Jews who converted, and particularly women who married Muslims, Jewish women married Muslims, and they would become entirely Kurdish speaking. Though the Jews who remained Jews in Jewish families, there was a greater pressure, social linguistic pressure, you could say, to lose their Aramaic because it was an emblem of Judaism. However, they did retain it in their homes to some extent. In fact, I think there is an interesting analogy of the Kurdish Jews in Israel, who equally were, in many cases, were hiding their Aramaic language, and openly they were Israelis, they're speaking Hebrew, and there was a pressure to lose their language, but still within the tight family units, they would retain the language, at least a knowledge of the language, even if they didn't use it on a day-to-day basis. So that the analogy between the Kurdish Jews who settled in Israel and the Jews who remained in Kurdistan linguistically are quite similar.
I want to thank everybody for a brilliant panel. We'll take 10 minutes coffee break or tea break, and then we'll resume. Thank you very much.